How you guys doing? My name is Jimmy Palumbo. Good to be here. I am from New Jersey, and I drove here to Long Island. And yeah, that's one thing about, it's really funny with Palumbo men. If you want to irritate a Palumbo man, just tell him he has to drive from Long Island or to New Jersey either way, because half my family lives in Long Island, the other half lives in New Jersey. So growing up, this has nothing to do with my story, by the way. So growing up, the first hour of every family event, the Palumbo men would huddle in the corner and argue over traffic conditions. I consider myself an authority on every road, bridge, and tunnel in the tri-state area. I mean, as a matter of fact, one of my uncles, I'm convinced, actually built a secret bridge from Long Island to New Jersey at night by hand so we can get to one of the events. And I always had one uncle who walked away from the conversation, just take the throgs, just take the throgs. So on the way here, I bet you can guess what bridge I took. 2.5 hours later. All right, so now listen, my dad was 100% Italian, all right? He lived his whole life in the working class suburbs of New Jersey, but he wasn't a Sopranos Italian. He just was a hard-working, old-school Italian. He had a favorite sandwich, which was gabagool, lettuce, oil, and vinegar on a nice Italian bread, right? No mayo. No mayonnaise ever. He didn't want it in the house. He didn't want you to say it. It was like a curse word. No mayo. He had that shitty tuna fish the Italian way, which nobody really likes unless you're like born in Italy. Of course, I like mayo, but that's another story. Now, he had favorite movies. His favorite movies were On the Waterfront, High Noon, and Ben-Hur. Now, back in the day, when they were on the 4:30 movie on Channel 7, dinner was postponed. I mean, you had to sit and watch it. Of course, Ben-Hur was on all week. It was like a 9-hour movie. He was a carpenter type of guy. He got up early in the morning, went to work, came home at 5:30, had a glass of wine, maybe two, sat down, watched a couple innings of the Yankee game, fell asleep. Rinse and repeat every day of my entire life. So one day, my dad gets summoned to jury duty. Now, he was older, and he ran his own construction company, so he could take the time to do his civic duty. So one day, my dad went to jury duty. He just woke up, did his thing. He came home around 5 p.m., and me and my mom were sitting at the kitchen table, and he was agitated. And when he was agitated, believe me, the whole house knew it. He says, "They shouldn't let you sit there all day in a room with nothing to do," he told my mom and me. I said, "I had nothing to read. I was just sitting there all day long." Now, I knew my dad was one of those busy bees, you know. He, like, sitting around there must have drove him nuts. He probably was looking around and noticed, like, if the trim was messy or something like that, he wanted to bring his tools and fix it. So then my mother says, "Artie, why did you just bring, like, some newspapers or bring your baseball books?" Now, my dad had a really good collection of baseball books, but they were mostly about the old Yankees, Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, Mantle, that kind of thing. And most of them were like picture books. You know, they had to have a lot of pictures. There was one point, me and my brother weren't even sure my dad could read, but I guess he could. So he just didn't read that much, what can I tell you? But he liked looking at the pictures. And as a matter of fact, he would even cut the picture out of a book and frame it on the wall. People were like, "Oh, where'd you get that photo?" He'd be like, "I got it from the book." And people would stare at him, you know. So my dad perked up at the suggestion, like, "Oh, I didn't know you could bring that. I didn't know you could do that." My mom says, "Sure, you know, you could do that," and she felt happy to help. But then he told us he has to go back again the next day, and this time he'd be prepared. So we thought, great, you know, problem solved. So my dad goes to the courthouse the next day, wakes up, we think nothing of it. He comes home again around 5 p.m. He walks in, he's got 5 big baseball books under his arm. But now he's super agitated. I mean, like, you know, being on the Belt Parkway on Easter Sunday agitated, right? So he slams the book on the kitchen table and he says, "I'll never go back there again. I tried my civic duty, but I can't take those people down there." So I was like, "Dad, what do you mean? What's going on?" He says, "They tried to take my baseball books away. And some kind of cop came over and he had a weird-looking uniform and he had a badge and he told me if I didn't put those books away, he would never see them again. In fact, the cop told my dad he could be arrested for it." So that really pissed off my father. I told this guy, he said he was a real jadru. And I said, "You know what? How can I be arrested for reading about some of the greatest hitters in the history of baseball?" So my mom and I were sitting there like stunned, So why would some security officer probably care about what you're reading while you're sitting in this room waiting for your name to be called, Everyone's reading or doing something, jury duty, waiting to get picked. So why are they treating my father this way? It didn't make any sense. Even I was getting pissed. Then my dad tells me they kept on moving us from room to room, which was a pain because you didn't want to leave the books around and he thought someone would steal them, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, Jesus almighty, these books get heavy after a while. So my mom and I are just trying to get a handle on this. I'm like, Dad, I don't understand. They call your name, they ask you some questions and see if you could actually be on the jury. So my dad's really struggling to be calm, and he looks like his head's going to explode, And he says, that's what I'm trying to tell you. They did all that. I went from room to room, and I ended up in this big room. There must have been about 10 of us in there sitting to the side. So I was just sitting there minding my own business, looking at my new book on Lou Gehrig I got at the Five Below store. And then he says, Jimmy, you're not going to believe what I paid for this. I said, $5? He's like, you've been there. It's a great store. They got all kinds of books there. So then, anyway, he starts telling me that, the cop starts yelling at him, you cannot read your books, and he's threatened to take him away. I'm thinking, that's unbelievable. Then everyone, he said, started to stare at me as if I was the bad guy. So I started arguing with the guy, and then the judge started getting involved. I said, whoa, Dad, the judge? There was a judge? He goes, yeah, the judge, with the black robe, the gavel, the whole bit, He wanted to know what was going on over there. I said, Dad, wait a minute. Going on where? Well, I was sitting in the box. I said, a jury box? Dad, you were on a jury. He goes, I don't know. I guess so. We were sitting there listening to a case. I said, Dad, what kind of case? He said, I don't know. Some guy came to the house and he smacked the guy in the head with a hammer, split his head wide open, blood gushing all over the place. It's crazy stuff, Jimmy. You don't hit a guy in the head with a hammer. There's no reason for that. This guy was totally wrong. I said, Dad, what was he facing? He says, I don't know, something like 25 or 50 years, hitting a guy with a hammer. There's no reason for that. So let me paint this picture for you. When the bailiff says, all rise, as the judge is walking in, my dad was sitting and flipping through his basement bargain book on Lou Gehrig. While the prosecution and defense attorneys are cross-examining a key witness in a manslaughter trial, my dad's earmarking pictures of clutch hitters he wanted to rip out later and hang on his wall. When the entire courtroom is quietly listening to testimony that could exonerate a man or put him away for 25 or 50 years, my dad's chuckling over some anecdote about Mickey Mantle. And yet, in spite of all this, my dad knew the highlights of the case. It's the kind of thing you'd expect from a no-nonsense dad, right? He could read the situation just like it was like a page out of one of his baseball books. Now, my dad didn't bring his baseball books to the trial after that. It wrapped up pretty quickly. The guy was found guilty. No surprise to anyone, especially my dad, because he was like, Jimmy, there was 2 outs, nobody on, down by 3. Forget it. The guy was done, He looks at me, he's like, but Jimmy, you don't hit a guy in the head with a hammer. There's no reason for it. Thank you.